Welcome to another deep dive, and this time we're going to be talking about one of the most, I think, perplexing incidents in U.S. history, the 1967 attack on the USS Liberty.
Yeah.
Our guide for this journey is James M. Scott's book, The Attack on the Liberty, packed with first-hand accounts and recently declassified documents.
Oh, wow.
So imagine you're on what seems like a routine mission in the Mediterranean.
Okay.
You're serving on a ship gathering intel,
Right.
and then suddenly all hell breaks loose.
Right.
And to make matters worse, the attackers are, get this, a supposed ally.
Oh, wow.
Sounds like something out of a spy thriller, right?
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
And what makes it even more intriguing is that the USS Liberty itself wasn't your typical warship.
Okay.
I mean, it was a converted cargo vessel.
Right.
But it was decked out with some serious surveillance equipment.
Oh.
I mean, we're talking top-of-the-line technology for intercepting communications.
Okay.
Powerful enough to potentially overhear highly classified conversations and even monitor troop movements.
So this wasn't just listening in on, like radio chatter.
No.
That's
This was the real deal.
Yeah, what kind of intelligence was the Liberty actually gathering that was so important?
Well, the Liberty was tasked with monitoring communications during the Six-Day War between Israel and its Arab neighbors.
Okay.
This was a highly volatile conflict,
Right.
with Cold War tensions kind of simmering in the background.
Right.
The intelligence the Liberty was gathering could have had major implications for U.S. foreign policy in the region,
Yeah.
especially since there were concerns about the conflict escalating and potentially drawing in the Soviet Union.
So the stakes were already incredibly high even before the attack.
Yeah.
But knowing the Liberty was essentially a floating listening post, and a vulnerable one at that, were there any special precautions taken to protect the ship?
Well, that's a great question.
Yeah.
And the answer is, unfortunately, not really.
Okay.
While the Liberty was in a declared war zone, there seems to have been a miscalculation about the level of risk.
Right.
The ship was only armed with 4 point-thick caliber machine guns,
Okay.
which, as you can imagine, offered minimal defense against a full-scale aerial and naval assault.
That's almost unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's like sending someone into a hurricane with nothing but a flimsy umbrella for protection.
Right.
And you mentioned earlier that the crew was largely inexperienced.
Yes, the crew was mostly young men, many fresh out of high school.
Wow.
They were excited about their first deployment, the prospect of seeing the world, maybe experiencing a bit of adventure.
Yeah.
Commander William McGonigal, the Liberty's captain, was a seasoned officer, strict but dedicated to his crew.
Right.
However, nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to face.
One can only imagine the shock,
Yeah.
the utter disbelief they must have felt when the attack began.
Right.
Could any of their personal accounts capture that initial moment of realization?
Absolutely.
That something was terribly wrong.
The book features excerpts from letters written by Ensign John Scott,
Oh.
the assistant operations officer.
Right.
Just days before the attack, he's writing home about buying souvenirs, the beautiful Mediterranean sunsets, even seeing dolphins alongside the ship.
Wow.
He was completely oblivious to the danger lurking on the horizon.
That's wild.
It really underscores the contrast between the normalcy of life on board and the sudden eruption of violence.
It's a stark reminder that even in times of conflict, life can seem almost routine, even peaceful, until in a flash, everything changes.
Right, and to truly grasp the magnitude of what happened that day, we need to consider the political backdrop of the time.
Okay.
The Cold War was at its peak.
Right.
Vietnam was raging, and the U.S. was walking a tightrope in the Middle East, trying to maintain a balance of power while avoiding a wider conflict.
Right.
President Lyndon B. Johnson was facing immense pressure from all sides.
Yeah, so even without the Liberty incident, the world was essentially a powder keg waiting to explode.
Yeah.
Johnson was navigating a diplomatic minefield, trying to appease domestic audiences while managing international relations on a global scale. That must have been incredibly stressful.
Absolutely. He was trying to maintain support for Israel while also navigating anxieties about potential Soviet involvement in the Middle East.
Yeah.
The Six-Day War itself was a major flashpoint, and the U.S. was trying to avoid being drawn into the conflict directly.
Knowing all of this now, the fact that the Liberty, a U.S. intelligence ship, was operating in such a volatile environment adds another layer of complexity to this story.
It does indeed.
Yeah.
And the events of June 8th, 1967,
Okay.
would further escalate those tensions and cast a long shadow over U.S.-Israeli relations for decades to come.
Okay, so now we've set the scene. A vulnerable ship, an unsuspecting crew, and a world teetering on the brink of chaos.
Right.
Let's talk about the attack itself.
Okay, so the attack on the Liberty began in the early afternoon on June 8th, 1967.
Okay.
Israeli fighter jets and torpedo boats launched a relentless assault,
Wow.
an attack that would last over an hour.
Over an hour?
Yeah.
Wow.
The ship was strafed with gunfire, rockets, and even napalm.
Napalm.
Yeah.
Wasn't that primarily used in Vietnam at the time?
That's right.
It seems like an incredibly aggressive tactic to use against what was clearly a U.S. vessel.
It was, and the use of napalm was particularly alarming.
Right.
It raised serious questions about the intent of the attackers
Yeah.
and the level of force used.
Right.
And what's even more baffling is that the ship's American flag was clearly visible throughout the attack.
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was a bright, sunny day in the Mediterranean,
Right.
and the flag was flying high. Yet the attacks continued relentlessly.
This is where it becomes truly unfathomable.
Yeah.
How could this happen, especially given the U.S.-Israeli alliance?
Right.
Were there any attempts to signal the attackers to make it absolutely clear that this was an American ship?
According to survivors' accounts, the crew frantically tried to signal the attackers.
Okay.
They used semaphore flags.
Right.
They shot flares.
Okay.
They even tried to send radio messages.
Wow.
But their efforts seemed to have no effect.
Wow. It's mind-boggling to think that all those signals were ignored.
Yeah.
It just adds another layer of mystery to this already confusing event.
Yeah.
So we have a U.S. intelligence ship in a war zone under attack by a supposed ally.
Right.
What happened next? Did anyone come to their rescue?
Help did eventually arrive, but not before the Liberty suffered extensive damage and heavy casualties.
Right.
The attack lasted over an hour, and during that time, the crew fought valiantly to keep the ship afloat.
Yeah.
They battled fires, tended to the wounded, and continued sending distress signals, hoping someone would hear their pleas.
It must have felt like an eternity trapped in that chaotic and terrifying situation.
Oh, absolutely.
You mentioned earlier that the Liberty wasn't well equipped for a major attack.
Right.
What kind of medical facilities did they have on board to deal with such extensive casualties?
The Liberty's infirmary was small and definitely not equipped to handle mass casualties.
Right.
They had one doctor, Lieutenant Commander Richard Kepfer,
Okay.
and a few corpsmen. Imagine the scene. The ship is on fire, under constant bombardment.
Wow.
And these medical professionals are performing emergency surgery,
Yeah.
treating shrapnel wounds,
Yeah.
and trying to comfort the dying, all while under threat themselves.
It's a testament to their courage and dedication that they were able to function at all under those circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely.
Were there any accounts from the survivors about what it was like to be in the midst of that chaos,
Sure.
to experience that level of violence firsthand?
The book does a remarkable job of bringing those personal stories to life.
Yeah.
One account that stands out is from seaman apprentice Dale Larkins.
Okay.
In a letter home, he writes, "Close to 35 boys died."
Wow.
That's one hell of a mistake, isn't it?
Yeah.
His words capture the raw emotion, the shock, and the grief of that day.
That line is incredibly poignant.
Yeah.
It cuts through the political jargon and reminds us that this wasn't just an international incident.
Right.
It was a tragedy that claimed the lives of young men who had their whole futures ahead of them.
Exactly.
And it raises the question,
Yeah.
if it was a mistake, why wasn't it acknowledged as such?
That's the heart of the matter, isn't it? The aftermath of the attack is almost as perplexing as the attack itself.
Right.
There was a sense of confusion,
Right.
a struggle to make sense of what had happened.
Right.
The world was trying to grapple with the idea of a U.S. ship being attacked by an ally.
Yeah.
And the explanations offered just didn't seem to add up.
So what explanation did Israel offer? Did they
Right.
immediately acknowledge responsibility for the attack?
Israel's initial response was to claim mistaken identity.
Okay.
They said they thought the Liberty was an Egyptian vessel,
Okay.
despite the fact that it was clearly marked as a U.S. ship
Right.
and was nowhere near Egyptian waters.
But you mentioned earlier that there were Israeli reconnaissance flights over the Liberty
Right.
before the attack even started.
That's right.
Wouldn't that have confirmed its identity?
That's right. The reconnaissance flights, combined with the Liberty's unique silhouette and markings,
Right.
made the mistaken identity claim difficult to believe.
Yeah.
It just seemed too implausible, especially given the duration and intensity of the assault.
So if the mistaken identity explanation didn't hold water, what other theories were put forward to explain the attack?
Well, there were several theories circulating within the U.S. government and intelligence community.
Okay.
Some officials believe that Israel intentionally attacked the Liberty
Okay.
to prevent it from gathering intelligence on Israeli military operations,
Right.
particularly their advance into the Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights.
So they were worried the Liberty might overhear something that would expose their true objectives in the war.
Yeah.
Objectives that perhaps went beyond what they had publicly stated.
Exactly.
Okay.
There was a concern that Israel didn't want the U.S. to know the full extent of their military actions
Yeah.
or their intentions regarding territorial expansion. The Liberty, with its sophisticated eavesdropping capabilities,
Right.
posed a direct threat to those plans.
It's a chilling thought
It is.
that a supposed ally would deliberately attack a U.S. ship to cover up their actions.
Yeah.
Did any evidence emerge to support this theory?
What?
Or was it just speculation within the intelligence community?
While there was no smoking gun,
Okay.
there were a number of inconsistencies in Israel's account of the attack.
Okay.
And some declassified documents hinted at a possible motive beyond simple mistaken identity.
Okay.
But proving intent, especially in the fog of war, is incredibly difficult.
You mentioned the fog of war.
Yeah.
Could you explain what that means in this context?
The fog of war refers to the uncertainty and chaos inherent in any conflict situation.
Okay.
Decisions are made under pressure, information is often incomplete or unreliable,
Yeah.
and mistakes can happen.
Right.
But in the case of the Liberty,
Okay.
the fog of war argument seemed to be used to deflect blame rather than to genuinely explain the incident.
So it sounds like there was a lot of finger pointing
Yeah.
and attempts to control the narrative, both from Israel and from within the U.S. government.
Absolutely.
What about the Liberty survivors themselves?
Well,
What role did they play in the aftermath of the attack?
initially the survivors were told to keep quiet about the attack.
Oh, wow.
They were warned not to speak to the press,
Okay.
threatened with disciplinary action if they shared their stories.
Wow.
This attempt to silence them only fueled their determination to seek the truth.
It's a classic case of trying to suppress information that challenges the official narrative.
It is.
But did those efforts to silence the survivors ultimately succeed?
Wow.
Were they able to share their experiences and have their voices heard?
Despite the pressure to remain silent, many survivors did eventually speak out.
Okay.
They shared their stories with family and friends,
Right.
they wrote letters to their congressmen,
Yeah.
and they eventually began to connect with each other, forming groups dedicated to seeking justice and accountability for the attack.
It must have been incredibly difficult for them to relive those traumatic experiences,
She was.
to push back against the official story
Right.
and demand recognition for what they had endured.
Yeah.
Did their efforts have any impact on the official investigation into the attack?
Their persistence did have an impact, albeit a slow and often frustrating one.
Okay.
The official Navy Court of Inquiry,
Right.
which was convened shortly after the attack,
Okay.
was limited in its scope
Right.
and ultimately concluded that the attack was a case of mistaken identity.
So despite all the inconsistencies
Yeah.
and unanswered questions, the official investigation essentially rubber-stamped Israel's version of events.
That's how many perceived it, yes.
Okay.
And this perceived whitewash only added to the survivors' sense of betrayal
Yeah.
and fueled their determination to uncover the truth.
Right.
They felt let down, not just by Israel,
Yeah.
but also by their own government, which seemed more concerned with protecting the U.S.-Israeli alliance
Right.
than with seeking justice for its own sailors.
So the survivors were essentially caught in the middle of this diplomatic tug of war.
Exactly.
Their experiences and their quest for truth overshadowed by political considerations.
Exactly. And this tension between the official narrative and the survivors' accounts
Right.
would continue for decades,
Right.
becoming a central theme in the ongoing debate about the Liberty incident.
It's heartbreaking to think about those sailors being silenced, their own government seemingly prioritizing diplomacy over justice.
Yeah.
What happened next?
What?
Did the survivors ever get any kind of resolution?
Well,
Any acknowledgement of what they had been through?
the road to any sort of resolution was a long and arduous one for the Liberty survivors.
Right.
Many of them were left with physical and psychological scars that haunted them for years after the attack.
Yeah.
They struggled to cope with the trauma, the loss of their friends, and the feeling that their government had abandoned them.
So not only were they dealing with the aftermath of a horrific attack,
Right.
but they also had to contend with a sense of betrayal from the very institutions they had sworn to serve.
Exactly.
How did they cope?
Yeah.
Did they eventually find ways to heal and move forward?
Some found solace in connecting with fellow survivors,
Okay.
sharing their stories, and supporting each other through the long process of healing.
Right.
Others channeled their frustration and anger into activism.
Okay.
becoming vocal advocates for a full and transparent investigation into the attack.
Right.
They wrote books, gave interviews, and testified before Congress,
Wow.
determined to keep the story of the Liberty alive and demand accountability for what had happened.
It sounds like their fight for recognition and justice became a driving force in their lives.
It did. It did for many.
Did their efforts eventually gain any traction?
Oh,
Did the government ever reconsider its initial stance on the attack?
their persistence, combined with growing public awareness of the incident, did eventually lead to some concessions. In 1999, Congress awarded the Liberty crew members the Congressional Gold Medal,
Wow.
the highest civilian honor bestowed by the U.S. government in recognition of their valor and sacrifice.
That must have been a powerful moment for the survivors
What?
to finally receive some measure of official recognition after so many years of being silenced and ignored.
Right.
Did that award bring any closure for them, or did they continue to push for a more thorough investigation into the attack itself?
While the Congressional Gold Medal was a significant symbolic victory,
Yeah.
many survivors still felt that the full truth about the attack remained elusive.
Okay.
They continued to press for a full accounting of the events,
Right.
access to classified documents, and a public acknowledgement of the possibility that the attack was deliberate.
So despite receiving this prestigious award, the survivors' quest for truth and justice was far from over.
It was not.
Did their campaign eventually lead to any further investigations or changes in the official narrative about the Liberty incident?
Their unwavering commitment did lead to some breakthroughs.
Oh,
Independent investigations,
right.
spurred in part by the survivors' advocacy,
Right.
unearthed new evidence and challenged the official narrative.
Okay.
Declassified documents revealed inconsistencies in the initial investigations
Wow.
and hinted at a possible motive beyond simple mistaken identity.
It's remarkable to think that decades after the attack, new information was still coming to light, challenging the accepted version of events.
Yeah, absolutely.
How did these revelations impact the public's perception of the Liberty incident?
Wow.
Did they shift the focus away from the fog of war explanation and towards the possibility of a more calculated act?
Those revelations did indeed have a significant impact on public opinion.
Okay.
The Liberty incident,
Right.
once largely dismissed as a tragic accident,
Right.
became a subject of renewed scrutiny and debate.
Okay.
Books, documentaries, and investigative reports explored the attack in depth,
Yeah.
highlighting the inconsistencies in the official narrative and amplifying the voices of the survivors.
So the survivors' persistence, their refusal to let the story fade away,
Yeah,
played a key role in bringing the truth to light.
absolutely.
It's a testament to the power of individual voices to challenge official narratives
Right.
and demand accountability,
Yeah,
even when facing powerful forces trying to bury the truth.
exactly. The story of the Liberty is a powerful reminder that history is not static,
Right.
that it is constantly being shaped and reshaped by new evidence, new perspectives, and the voices of those who lived through those events.
It also underscores the importance of critical thinking,
Yeah,
of questioning official pronouncements,
absolutely.
and of seeking out multiple sources of information to form our own conclusions.
Indeed.
Yeah.
The Liberty incident serves as a cautionary tale, reminding us to be wary of simplistic explanations,
Right.
especially in matters of war and international relations where truth can be elusive and motivations can be complex.
The attack on the USS Liberty remains one of those controversial and perplexing incidents in U.S. history.
It does.
But it's more than just a historical footnote.
Right.
It's a story about courage, resilience, and the enduring power of truth.
Exactly.
It's a story that challenges us to think critically about the information we consume,
Right.
to question authority, and to never forget the human cost of conflict.
And perhaps most importantly, it's a story that reminds us that even in the face of overwhelming odds,
Yeah.
even when confronted with official narratives that seek to silence dissent,
Right.
the pursuit of truth is a worthwhile endeavor.
Yeah.
The Liberty survivors, through their perseverance and unwavering commitment to uncovering what really happened that day,
Right.
have left an enduring legacy,
Yeah.
one that will continue to inspire and challenge us for generations to come.
Well, this deep dive into the attack on the USS Liberty has been a sobering reminder of the complexities of history and the importance of seeking truth, even when it's uncomfortable. And if you're interested in learning more about this event, we encourage you to read James M. Scott's book,
Absolutely.
The Attack on the Liberty.
A great book.
It's a meticulously researched and gripping account that will leave you with a deeper understanding of this tragic event and its lasting impact.
Absolutely.
So until next time, keep on learning and keep on questioning.